Do you think you would ever electrocute anybody? Before you answer, I want you to think about this experiment. Back in 1961, a gentleman named Stanley Milgram performed one of the most notorious psychological experiments in history. This was essentially a test of obedience. However, it was sold to the participants as a test of learning. Similar to the Stanford prison experiment almost a decade later, this experiment showed that the evil isn't necessarily something within us, something dispositional, but what we call evil is actually generated by the situation and by the environment. Here's the setup of the experiment. One of the participants would come into the room and sit down with a confederate, who the participant thought was just another participant of the experiment. The researcher would tell them that they're conducting an experiment of learning and memory. Now, one of the participants has to be the teacher and one has to be the student. Now, the student is the one who will be given little shocks starting from just 15 volts up in 15-volt increments all the way up to 450 volts. Now, with the confederate and the participant in the room, to keep the illusion, they draw straws to see who's going to be the student and who's going to be the teacher, but of course it's fixed. They take the student, which is actually the confederate, over into another room along with the teacher. The teacher sees the student being strapped in to what resembles an electric chair. As they strap the student into the electric chair, the teacher gets a little 15-volt shock just to see what the 15-volt shock actually feels like. Then they put the electrodes on the student and the illusion is complete. At this point, the teacher leaves the room and the door shuts. So now the teacher is in a new room. The teacher is sitting down at a desk with a big panel of a whole bunch of switches, again ranging from 15 volts all the way up to 450 volts. The experimenter in a lab coat looking very official is sitting right next to the teacher. At this point, the teacher asks a series of questions one at a time to the student who is ostensibly in the other room, strapped to this electric chair still, about to get these shocks, if he answers these questions wrong. The teacher proceeds with the first question. The student answers it correctly. Proceeds with the second question, and so forth. Eventually, the student answers it incorrectly. At this point, the teacher is instructed to give a small electric shock by flipping one of the switches, starting at 15 volts. So far, no problems. However, as the student gets more and more of these questions incorrect, he obviously starts displaying more and more distress to the point of screaming and begging to get out of the chair. Now, the teacher is also at this point very upset and does not want to continue, but the experimenter calmly says, "You must continue. The experiment requires that you continue. Please continue." How far do you think the participant would actually go before he just says, "That's it, I'm out of here, I'm not doing this anymore"? You'd be surprised. Now, there were many different versions of this experiment that were actually done. For example, in one of the versions, the experimenter was not in the same room as the teacher. But in the version I just described, out of 40 participants, 65% of them went all the way up to the 450 volt, which was labeled XXX, as in death. Now, this experiment didn't show that we are evil by nature. It didn't show that we're mean sadists that like to cause pain and deliberate suffering of other people. What it did show is that we're suckers when it comes to authority figures. In this experiment, all it took was some guy in a lab coat with a clipboard looking and sounding very official for 65% of the participants to deliver what ostensibly was a fatal shock to a learning subject. Now, keep in mind that this experiment was done back in 1961 with all males. However, this experiment was repeated within the last decade, but of course, due to ethics codes, they could not repeat the experiment exactly, so they changed things up a little bit to make it less ethically questionable. But the more recent experimenters came to essentially the same conclusion, finding that whether it's men or women, people of all different races, different ages, basically they found the same results. The next time an authority figure tells you that you must do something, you might want to take a step back. look at the situation, look at the authority figure, and if it still makes sense, then go ahead and follow the authority figure. However, if not, have enough courage to say, I'm out of here.